My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran New, fellow Nyanis. Um, the last time I spoke about the notion of the what's the characteristics of God, and Swamiji gives very clear description. He defines it as small I and the big I, and he does show that as we look at things, how we characterize God depends very much on our state of our mind. And if our mind is at a gross level, we see God in a very gross, somewhat like us, but as our mind becomes more and more refined and more subtle, we see God in a more subtle way. And interestingly, as our mind becomes more subtle, the God also becomes more subtle. It becomes more universal, and we are able to see God in much more universal way. We see it within us and in everything that we cognize, everything that we think, everything that we see is all that oneness. There's no separation or the two-ness. And this is what we covered the last time. And we went through stages showing how even science has come to that stage of, understanding that we all come from this nothing, something by chance is what Swamiji says. I want to explore today a little bit more some deep questions that were asked to Mahan and how he responds to characterizing God. So here, uh, a disciple asks Swamiji on God, and this existence of God and what this existence means in the context of, both from our practical perspective, from religious perspective, and also from a spiritual perspective. So, and this question is quite interesting in the sense that the disciple asks, uh, how, to whom does God exist? Does God really exist, and to whom does He not exist? Some people say God is there, some people say God is not there. So I was asking this Mahan, to whom does God exist, and to whom does God not exist? And so Swamiji here says, look, to whom he says that God exists to all creatures living, in the dense forests, on the mountains, and in the gardens. He says that, and this is very important because everything is a manifestation of God. And here he describes that if everything is a manifestation of God, then God must exist in all these creatures, and a part of God's DNA is part of everything that was manifested, in the form of, creatures living, you know, uh, in forests, in mountains, in gardens, you know, and every being, whether it's a one cell or, more, the Homo sapiens, God exists for all of them, you see. And interestingly, he says that as all their food requirements, so because of existence and because the biological beings exist, there must be something that sustains them. So the energy to support them must be there. Otherwise, they would not be existing. So here he says that, God also exists as their food, and ensure that, it is all available in appropriate amounts and, and takes place in an orderly way. So he says God exists for and to such living beings, to all these beings. So it's quite interesting if you look at this very carefully of evolution. So he's slowly touching a little bit of evolution, that if the creatures are unable to acquire this food or this energy to sustain themselves, they become extinct. So existence for them would not be possible. And if you look at our own human history, our own evolution, over time, we have evolved. We were living like all other animals. We were eaten by other animals. We also ate other animals. And survival was very, very difficult. Not only animals, but we also had weather to sometimes the weather could be extremely hot or extremely cold. And you see that for survival, God or nature is embedded in us to help us adapt to these changes. And when food was scarce, uh, something happened in the human species that the mind had to make a leap to be able to survive. And this is what happens to all creatures. And the leap was that humans, which traditionally were, in living in tribes, had to move to other places. And this is where the migration started taking place. The first migration is that, we were all like any other animals, but we had to reach out to the trees and other plants and other things which were beyond us, and it forced us to stand up. And we started, standing up on two, from four-legged to two-legged, so that we are able to reach the food, we're able to climb, we're able to do many, many things that we were not able to do before. And the same thing was, there was a leap in our brain, our neural activity, that enabled us to now start, you know, instead of fighting like tribes, started strategizing. And interestingly, as we became more and more strategic, our brain power, intensified. We came together and we were able to bring down the biggest beast. What these beasts used to eat us, now man was able to, through strategy and through the intellectual, leap, was able to corner this animal and bring it down, and it became food. Its fur became, an important insulator against cold weather, and so on. And this is part of nature's survival instinct that built in all of us, that made that the human Homo sapiens to have that evolution from all the other species, and through the intermingling of these different species before we Homo sapiens develop a brain that became, much more complex, but yet is able to address some of the complexity that the environment posed. And over time, we not only were, hunting, but we also knew how to strategize our hunting, activities. We were able to develop crops. We were able to then move from land to land to more focused farming. And over time, we were able to, and there was major leap in our intellectual and brain capacity as we were starting to get better food. We were able to bring down, not only protein, but we also started to get other nutrients, and our brain developed very quickly. And you see that nature gave that Homo sapiens that advantage to be able to think. And this is where over time, we develop language. No other species has this. We are able to then transmit information across different generations. So this is where one of the most powerful things we Homo sapiens have, or we humans have, compared to most other animals, is the ability to think, cognize, ability to develop language. And these language are able to enable us to communicate and pass on information generation after generation. And that is one of the biggest leap that gave us the advantage, that that information or the experience that we get do not die with us, but we can pass it on for generation after generation. And that really helped that evolutionary development of we humans. And you see that we are continuously developing, exploring new things. And it is part and parcel of when things become really difficult in the environment, our human mind makes that leap. And what we are experiencing today also is that if we see in terms of COVID, of course, many of us are indoor, but during this COVID period, I think it is one of the most innovative period that over the last year and a half. You see that the vaccine development used to take, 3 to 5 to, sometimes 10 years to develop, but within a year, we were able to come together, and, the urgency really enhance our creativity. So sometimes challenges make our mind more creative and make that leap. The same thing, I think if you see all the satsangs that we've been having in the digital satsang, the COVID actually, although we physically cannot meet, but enable us to think more creatively and help us, now uh, do this digital satsang, and we can now, disseminate this knowledge to everyone. So here Swamiji says that nature or God actually is, part and parcel in all of us. So in that context, God exists within all of us because the DNA of God is with us. So this whole idea that to whom does it exist? It exists to everyone. So someone asked this question, does animals also are enlightened? Animals are jivan mukti. That means they are, enlightened as they are. So because God is part and parcel of their own DNA. So again, we see that God exists in every one of us. The next part, the second part he answers is that whom does not, whom does not exist, that this God does not exist. So Swamiji explains this, that, in all of us, God exists, right? But what he says is that God does not exist merely to satisfy tradition or conservativeness of man. You know, just because, I have a particular value, because of that value that God exists for me, or this is what the belief of what God is. Whether the believer or the non-believer, God exists. That's what he's saying here. So it's not about, our tradition, or our values. God exists, but how you characterize God differs. So here, Swamiji says, for the traditional man, God does not exist in the sense that God is seen as separate to himself. So he says, in that context, for them, the wholesome, the holistic God does not exist, because here they feel God is, a characterization of this and that. In a limited way, they try to capture God. So in that context, Swamiji says that, God is universal and wholesome and paripurnam. For someone who's traditional and conservative that tries to box God in this, that universal God does not exist, because they don't see it, they don't cognize it, they don't experience it. So here Swamiji explains that for them, that universal God does not exist. For someone who's universal, they see God in every place, in everyone, in every being. God is not separate from anything. But sometimes when we are conservative or dogmatic in our belief, we say God is here and not there. If God is here and not there, then that God cannot be universal or infinite. So it's a limited God. So this is what he's saying, that, God is infinite. There is no place he's not. He's in everything and everywhere. So here, he also gives this description of this, very dogmatic way of seeing God. He says that, in all our lives, we have challenges, we have sufferings. This is something part and parcel of life, right? Through sukha and dukkha is what shapes our character and our mind. As I said earlier, the sufferings of the early primitive man is what made the leap in our mind to be able to transcend those sufferings and challenges that made us more creative. If there was no sufferings and challenges and, things that make us work hard, I don't think our mind would be as evolved as what we are today. So when we see that also, if you see great personalities, if you look at their lives, they would have gone through some really challenging experience, but they're able to transform the challenges into opportunities for learning. They're able to transform the scars into stars. And they're able to, take both the sukha and dukkha as a combustion for the enlightenment. But when you take a very dogmatic approach of God, or in a very limited way, we only search for God when we are in trouble, or we want something good, so, and other times we are not connected to God. So this is what Swamiji says. For them, that wholesome, complete, universal God is not there, because all the mind is searching for is that limitedness. When the mind is limited, as what Sri, in one of the scriptures, the master says is karpunya dosha. The mind is limited. When the mind is limited, it is unable to see that complete wholesome God. And so here he says that, interestingly, people, only they search for God when they are in trouble or when they are searching for pleasure. For them, that wholesome God does not exist. So Swamiji takes that God is everything. We are part of God, and that universal lens. If you have that universal lens, for you, God exists everywhere, in every person. Whether you are in a place of worship, or whether you are in the sabe, or whether you are in your home, or whether you are in the washroom, or whether you are anywhere, God still exists, because He has never been separated from you. Everything is a manifestation of God. Hence, in every circumstances, in every place, in every moment, God is connected. So if there is a separation, he says, then you miss that wholesomeness, that connectedness. So this is the answer he gives, that for those who are connected, universal God always exists. And if you don't have that connectedness, you see that you will miss God, that wholesome God. Then there's also a very interesting question. You say, are there no eyes for God? And it's quite interesting that this question was posed. And I thought about this very carefully. Why would somebody ask this question to Swamiji? Of course, God has, is all knowing, and that's what, and what would have prompted this disciple to ask this question? And I wondered. And then I thought about it a little bit more carefully, and looking at Swamiji's response, then I realized that this was during a period where, you know, times were very difficult. In the 1940s, the war, we saw what happened in millions of people were killed. Millions of people were killed because of they belonged to a particular race. Hitler was having his field day, and many people were killed. And there was poverty, and also, in the 30s, people went through depression, economic depression. So, and a lot of diseases. And so, I can understand why people would have this in their mind. They say that if God is all knowing and all noble and all gracious, why isn't this being resolved? Right? Why would there be a lot of sufferings? And I thought about it very carefully. Perhaps that's what prompted this question. That given that we know God is all knowing, then the question would come from someone that if God is all knowing, then why is there so much suffering? Why is there murder, and why is there so many things that are happening? So so sometimes it's really good to try to probe into why would somebody ask this question, under what circumstances are they asking this question, and the response of the guru, and how the guru enlightens the person who's asking this question. So Swamiji's response was quite interesting. He says that intelligent men are the eyes of God. See, here he means people who are wise, have got the wisdom, knowledge to see things in a more complete and wholesome way. And here he speaks about, yes, both sukha and dukkha, it can manifest in different forms. There are times that things are really great, good jobs, people are happy, they can have a lot of wealth. But there are also times that we have depressions and challenges, and as how we are going through now with COVID and people losing jobs. These are part of cycle of life, and there are times where people, many people die because of disease, or or war or famine. He says this is part and parcel of life, and part of sukha and dukkha. And the intelligent men are aware of this, and they are the ones that actually are able to give a more complete, wholesome understanding of this, how to mitigate. So when you have very high exuberance, how do you modulate and moderate that to a level of samatva? When you have very challenging circumstances, how do you bring people up back to a level of equanimity and samatva, so that we don't, bounce up and down? We have, no matter what the circumstances are, we are about our vibrations and our mind is always in a state of samatva equanimity. And that's what the wise men do. And why that is really important is that when the mind is calm and cool, there's a sense of clarity. When the clarity comes, you're able to solve problems that causes some of those challenges in life and sufferings and so on. When you get all agitated and all flustered, it's hard to think of creative solutions. And that is why he says that wise men, intelligent men are the eyes of God, because they are able to enable people to overcome the problems and also enable people to achieve a more peaceful and sublime and universal life. So he says that these intelligent men are who has come to increase and spread knowledge by the profusion of his love. So it means he's saying that these people acquire this knowledge, and because of unconditional love, that they're able to give this knowledge. And it's quite interesting. This afternoon I was at a conference, and this brain surgeon was speaking at this conference, and he was telling he was trained in Europe, and he came back, very good training in neurosurgery, and he came back to Malaysia. He's a Malaysian. He came back to Malaysia and he wanted to serve the country. He could have got a job anywhere in the world, but he wanted to come back and serve the country. And he said that the first case he had was that a poor farmer's daughter came in, very young kid with a very big head. That means the brain has, expanded, or there's fluids in the brain. And he saw it and he says, "Look, I want to do something about it." But they didn't have a catheter, that drains that fluid. And it cost 2,000 US. This is in 1985. And he was telling us the story, which was quite a touching and very inspirational story. And he says that he realized that, it's costing 2,000 USD. The poor cannot do it. So he spent time, through his own creativity, developed a catheter, and which is very cheap. But nobody in Malaysia wanted to produce it because very few cases and the cost is so low. The return on investment is very low. No Malaysian company wanted to do it. So he went to India and they were able to do that catheter for 50 ringgit, 50 rupees, right? So he says that he did not patent it. He gave the patent to the government and say, "Look, use it." And he says today, because of that, the acquiring that knowledge and the love for the people, he says, "I would have been a millionaire if I had patented it and companies would have acquired it." But he gave it out for free. And today the catheter that is used around the globe and is well cited for his work is used to help, poor communities. They don't have to pay 2,000 USD. It's only 50 rupees. I'm sure today it's a little bit more higher, but it's affordable. And that's what Swamiji is speaking about here. Intelligent, men and women are the eyes of God, and, equally, women also have played a key role. So here you see that they are the eyes of God, and they're sincere, and true spirituality will unlock that unconditional love and the creativity to make a difference. And he goes on to say, "Who is rid of all miseries." They themselves are at a state of peace, right? And these men and women don't carry any grudges or any. Their mind is kind of a blissful, happy, joyful. That's what Swami says, "Summa irukum sugam," the beautiful, the tejas. They don't have any miseries, right? And they're freed from any intellectual slavery, which is annihilated. And he says that they don't depend on others for this knowledge. And you see that it's quite interesting that he says that people who spend time in introspecting, contemplating, reflecting, and meditating, they would be very creative in their mindset, and they'll be able to discover new things. They don't mortgage their intelligence. and there'll always be, something cannot be done. It's okay. We will try and push really hard to discover, and you see that, they also don't, one of the things is that the dual state, there's no dual state of, I and separate, I and God are separate. We are one. If divinity is part of me, then I should be able to unlock the divinity in me. I'm not separate from God. And this is the part that somebody says that ni na naneni nium nanum nanena. If that universal unity is part of us, then I should not be able to see, I should not see separation between myself and God, and separation between myself and others, including, Mother Nature, including the animals, including other people. So we would not see that duality. We'll see all we see is that universality. And you see that, they are always in that state of, they're not faltering. They always think through very carefully what they're doing, careful thought, before they make the decision. So you see that, and for them, that self-realization is the ultimate state of existence. And they realize themselves, they understand who they are. When you understand yourself, you can understand everything else. So Swamiji clearly summarizes here that intelligent men are those who have that unconditional love, the love for knowledge, the love for wanting to make a difference. They're not, caught up by any miseries or intellectual slavery. What he means is dogmatic belief systems, that this is it, and this is how you should follow, as opposed to being aware, experiencing it, and that no duality. They see everything universal, and you see that, they don't have any blemishes in their mind. The mind is a beautiful abode of enlightenment. And this is what Swamiji says, that this God, in its universal form, manifests in people who pursue, that introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, and live by that. And you can see the way they think, the way they speak, their behavior, and also their own way of life, how they conduct their lives. So he says that you don't have to go far away. Look, among yourselves, and the beautiful part, and Guru Sankaran adds this, he says that don't expect a miracle, be the miracle. Don't expect change, be the change agent. He says, and don't expect blessings, be the blessing. And that's what Swamiji is telling here, is that if we all realize the divinity in us, then how should our thoughts be? How should our speech be? How should our actions be? And this is what he's highlighting, that these are the wise, people that step in God's shoes. So again, if you have that understanding, this next question is quite easy. Where is God? And Swamiji says that God is not over your head or below your feet. He says, when you look at yourself more and more, you, the seer, become the God. So what he's saying is that the true noka noka, he says that if you go deep within yourself, unravel from that gross form to the more subtle form, and the most subtlest form will lead you to that God realization state, and you realize, aha, I have discovered God in its entirety, not outside me, but inside me. The day that happens, you see God everywhere. You'll see him in the places of worship. You'll see him in schools. You'll see him in your home. You'll see God in the public places. You'll see God in every person and every being that comes to you, including the street dogs and every creature, including Mother Nature. And you have full of respect and reverence for all of it. And you live in a harmonious way. And this is what Swamiji is saying, that God is part and parcel of us. You don't have to go anywhere. Look within all of us. If God is infinite, what is the closest distance God is with? Zero distance. The zero distance is within all of us. How do I get to the zero distance when my mind is 100 kilometers away from me, thinking about all the other things? He says this is where that introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation, anchoring your mind the unarvu to your own, God force within you. The nature is blessed with you. Anyone that keeps the mind, in that divine cosmic vibration will discover that divinity. And this is what Swamiji's message is. So every day, allocate time for yourself, for your own self development, self exploration, and self realization process. You know, at least half an hour, and then try to prolong it in every facet of your life. And you'll see that you have no choice, but God will appear in many, many forms as your spouses, as your children, as your friends, as your colleagues, as a person that is coming to clean your home or clean your office, you know, as your, or, as your workers or as your boss, and, and the people around you. And you see that, wow, you feel it a beautiful feeling that, as what Swami says, Summa Irukum Sugam, life becomes very blissful. So with that, I'm going to conclude that, this universal mindset that Swamiji talks about, the small I and big I, as long as we are in the small I state, we'll always see the limitedness, we'll always see that the smallness, we'll always see the mortalness. But as we transcend to the big I state, we see that our frequency deepens, expands, and we'll see things in a more wholesome, more subtle, things that we could not pick up before, things that we could not understand before becomes more and more clearer with, a mind that is converging from the small I to the big I. With that, Sandosham.